Yesterday I drove through South Tel Aviv. The streets are again bustling, people shopping at the small market stalls. No one is avoiding the sidewalk, and yet the shutters are still gloomily down on the block where the suicide bomber struck just a week ago. The young suicide bomber sent by the radical Palestinian group Islamic Jihad. He struck at a falafel sandwich stand, killing 9 and wounding scores. In absolute moral terms, every death in a conflict situation is equivalent to another. But it's the way of the world, and not a wholly immoral way, that some incidents, some deaths, have more political significance than others. The downtown Tel Aviv attack is one of those seminal moments in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Seminal because instead of what to do with Hamas, the question on the international agenda now is, what will Hamas do? Instead of searching for the best way to handle the Hamas government, the focus is on a Hamas policy which defiantly endorses terror attacks. Let me quote from an impressive article in the Tel Aviv Daily Haaretz. It reads, "There are no words adequate to condemn the despicable attack in Tel Aviv. Not only because it is contrary to the interests of the Palestinian people, and not only because it serves the interests of the many warmongers in our region, but because of the philosophy that lies behind it, a philosophy of death, a racist philosophy, a philosophy of war criminals, of self-destruction, a philosophy that is destroying the Palestinian people." The writer is Galilee Arab Nazir Majali, correspondent of a number of Arabic language papers around the world. In the wake of the suicide bombing, there was another stinging rebuke, this one delivered by Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. He labeled the attack an operation that does not go in line with the Palestinian national consensus nor the interests of the Palestinian people. Abbas's angry criticism of Islamic Jihad contrasted starkly with the way Hamas spokesman called the attack a natural result of the continued Israeli crimes against our people, and that our people have every right to use all means to defend themselves. Implicit in Abbas's condemnation was rejection of the Hamas moral absolute, the Islamist party's position that it will never recognize Israel. Hamas duly lashed back at Abbas, calling him cowardly. But let's look at the facts. Until now, the world has been grasping with the question, grappling with what to do with Hamas. The United States, the European Union, and Israel have adopted a policy of pressure by withholding all financial backing to the new Palestinian administration led by Hamas, and also severing contacts with it. But the policy was not yet absolute, as other nations, Turkey, Russia, and through the Arab and Muslim world, advanced a counter-argument that the money ban was not only immoral in that it hurt the Palestinian people, but it was also unfair in that it did not give Hamas a chance, in their view, to justify the choice of the Palestinian people. By making national interests subservient to moral absolutes, its perverted moral absolutes, some would say, Hamas has tilted the argument against itself. History should forever remind us of the limitations of our passing perspective, writes the famous American historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. History, he says, should strengthen us to resist the pressures to convert momentary interests into moral absolutes. Schlesinger was referring to America's wars in Vietnam and now in Iraq, but what he has had to say has relevance to another nation in deciding about its national interests, the Palestinians. Ought they not to be trying to learn from their history, try to determine whether finding a way to coexist with Israel rather than to battle it in a fight to the finish is not in fact the preferable Palestinian national interest? Before this crisis suddenly came upon it, Hamas seemed to be skillfully positioning itself, not unlike the way Yasser Arafat managed to do, not to support terror and to be disassociated from it on one hand, but not to actively fight it and to allow the terror weapon to be used as part of what was called Palestinian self-defense. Now, if Hamas chooses to continue to adhere to its moral absolutes, then it will clearly not only do nothing to stem the tide of Islamic Jihad and others who want to attack Israel, it will cleave to the absolute positions adopted, in the presence of some Hamas leaders, in Tehran only last week, where hundreds of thousands of martyrs were urged to join the cause of eliminating Israel, or as it's called, the Zionist entity. On the other hand, even before the Islamic Jihad attack, President Abbas was locking horns with Hamas, trying to convince friends of the Palestinians that they ought to put their trust and their financial support in his authority rather than in the Hamas administration. Abbas engaged in a second phase of the ongoing struggle as he barred a prominent Gaza militant Israel maintains he is a wanted terrorist from taking up an appointment, a new one made by Hamas, to form a new police force under its control. It is both a battle for power and for moral supremacy within the Palestinian camp, and it continues. And while the Palestinians battle among themselves, some were predicting that Israel would resume a strong tit-for-tat military retaliation approach. Wisely, Israel's new leader, Ehud Olmert, has resisted the temptation to hit hard. Because they refuse to restrain the attackers, he does lay the blame for suicide attacks at the door of Hamas, but prefers a policy of keeping the international pressure firmly on Hamas. There's something else, however, which the Israeli Prime Minister would do well to take into account, something suggested also by Nizar Majali in that same impressive article. Terror, he writes, is not created without reason. The Palestinian people is in despair. The argument of despair caused by Israel's pressure on the Palestinians does not justify terror. Terror cannot be justified, writes Majali, but why terror happens can also not be ignored. Recognition of that is a sobering step towards recognizing that national interest and moral absolutes can come together, ought to come together, for the creation of sound and sane policy.